They survived ice ages, they hunted mammoths. They ruled parts of Europe for more than 300,000 years. And yet, they're gone. Not because they were weak, not because they were stupid, and not because they lost a war. Here's the unsettling part. Extinction doesn't require failure. Sometimes it only requires bad timing. A decade of sudden cold, a few winters with less game, a population spread too thin, one more shock in a world already collapsing. If history had shifted only slightly, if chance had favored another path, the minds behind your cities, your languages might have been Neanderthal minds. So what really happened? Was it climate? Was it chance? Was it us? Or was it something far more uncomfortable? That evolution rewards survival, not superiority? Tonight we're exploring the strongest scientific theories behind the disappearance of the Neanderthals. No myths, no fantasy, just what the evidence actually suggests. This is the ancient code, and tonight we're asking why the Neanderthals vanished. For much of the 20th century, Neanderthals were portrayed as crude, slow, brutish, a failed experiment replaced by something better. That picture doesn't survive contact with archaeology. Neanderthals were skilled, adaptable humans. They controlled fire. They crafted complex tools. They processed hides. They lived through brutal cold, scarce resources, and constant risk. And one detail changes everything. Some Neanderthals lived with severe injuries, broken bones, missing teeth, chronic conditions, and survived for years. That only happens in a society with cooperation, with care, with shared survival. So when we ask, why did they disappear? We have to drop the old story, because the real mystery isn't how they failed. It's how a species that lasted hundreds of thousands of years could suddenly fall into a final decline. What kind of force can push a resilient human lineage over the edge? The problem wasn't cold. Neanderthals had mastered cold. The problem was instability. To understand that, scientists look for natural archives, places where the Earth records its own history. Some of the best archives are deep volcanic crater lakes. In certain lakes, the bottom water contains little to no oxygen. That matters because it means sediments aren't disturbed by animals or currents. They settle quietly, layer after layer, like pages in a book. And here's the key. In the right conditions, each thin layer can represent a single year, a high-resolution climate timeline. And what these records, along with Greenland ice cores, show around the late Neanderthal period is not a smooth descent into colder temperatures. It's violent oscillation, warm stretches that flip into sudden freezes, forest turning into open steppe, steppe hardening into permafrost, and not over millennia, sometimes over decades. That's a different kind of threat, because ecosystems don't adapt instantly. When climate swings fast, animals migrate or crash, plant communities shift, and stable hunting patterns dissolve. Neanderthals could adapt, and they did. But adaptation has a cost. Every shock reduces numbers, every recovery starts smaller, and eventually a population reaches a threshold where it can't absorb the next hit. And that leads to the most important theory of all, one that isn't about strength, but about math. Imagine you're not looking at a continent full of people. Imagine you're looking at Europe with pockets of humans scattered across huge distances. Evidence from demographic modeling and genetics suggests Neanderthal groups were often small and fragmented, which makes any population extremely sensitive to chance. Now picture a band of, say, 15 to 25 individuals. If one winter is too harsh, if hunting fails, if disease hits, If several children don't survive, there isn't a nearby city. There isn't a larger network sending support. A small dispersed population can drift into extinction without a single dramatic moment. This is what researchers mean when they talk about a demographic tipping point, when a population becomes so thinly spread that recovery becomes statistically unlikely. And at small scales, things get worse. Reduced genetic diversity, fewer potential mates, lower resilience after losses, and even the loss of cultural knowledge if key individuals die. In other words, you can have a population that's perfectly intelligent, perfectly capable, and still disappear. Not because it loses a fight, but because the margin for error is gone. And once the margin is gone, one more factor becomes dangerous: competition. Because at the same time, Neanderthals were being squeezed by climate instability. Another human lineage was expanding into the same world. When Homo sapiens expanded into Europe, the simplest story would be conquest. But the evidence does not require a conquest narrative. A more realistic scientific framing is ecological competition. Two human species, overlapping territories, overlapping prey, overlapping shelters. But one likely advantage mattered enormously: network size. Modern human groups appear to have maintained wider social connections, longer distance exchange routes, bigger mating pools. That means ideas move faster. Tools and techniques spread wider. And after local disasters, populations can rebound through connections. So if Neanderthals were already fragmented and declining, even mild competition could become severe pressure. Not instantly, not as a war, but as a slow generational squeeze. Slightly less access to prime hunting zones, slightly fewer calories per season, slightly fewer surviving children. And over thousands of years, slightly becomes everything. Now add one more possibility: a shock so large that it doesn't merely stress the system, it breaks it. Around 40,000 years ago, a massive eruption tore through southern Italy. The Campanian ignimbrite event associated with the Campi Flegrei volcanic system. Scientists track eruptions like this in two main ways. Tephra, volcanic ash layers found far from the source, chemically fingerprinted back to the eruption. Ice cores, which can preserve sulfate spikes from volcanic aerosols. Research on tephra dispersal shows the Campanian ignimbrite spread ash widely across parts of the Mediterranean and into Eastern Europe, evidence of a major, far-reaching event. And the reason this matters is simple. Large eruptions don't just drop ash. They can inject sulfur aerosols into the upper atmosphere, reflecting sunlight and contributing to short-term cooling. No responsible scientist calls this a single smoking gun. But many researchers consider it a plausible accelerator, a shock event landing at the worst possible time. If Neanderthals were already reduced in number, concentrated in fewer refuges, stressed by rapid climate swings and facing competition, then a major disruption could push some populations past recovery. Not necessarily in 1 year, but progressively because of reduced plant productivity, disrupted herbivore herds, longer winters, fewer successful hunts, more starvation risk. And again, this doesn't require Neanderthals to be inferior. It only requires them to be few. Which leads to the final twist, because in one sense they didn't fully disappear at all. For a long time, extinction sounded absolute. Gone means gone. But genetics changed the story. Multiple studies show that many humans outside Africa carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA, evidence of interbreeding between lineages. So the end wasn't a clean replacement. It was at least partly a merging. Neanderthals didn't vanish like a light switching off. They faded, fragmented, and in some places blended into the rising modern human populations. Which reframes the question. Maybe the real story isn't, how did we defeat them? Maybe it's, how did a resilient human lineage get trapped by instability, demographics, and timing until it became absorbable? Neanderthals didn't disappear because they were dumb, or weak, or less human. They disappeared because the world became unstable. Their numbers fell too low, and chance favored one lineage over another. If conditions had shifted slightly, we might be telling this story differently. Evolution doesn't reward morality. It doesn't reward genius. It doesn't even reward strength. It rewards survival. Sometimes unfairly, sometimes randomly, sometimes brutally. And that should make us pause. Because the forces that shaped their fate are still shaping ours. And the next time you hear someone say extinction is simple, remember the Neanderthals. They were not erased. They're still here, in us.